Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first foster parent panel. What does it look like to engage in foster care? Before we get started tonight, you'll see that there's a poll popping up on your screen that we invite you to fill out and let us know what brought you here tonight. We'd like to welcome you on behalf of America's Kids Belong. Our mission, as you may know, is to dramatically improve the experiences and outcomes for kids in foster care. And this event is part of that mission as we work to inspire, engage, and educate folks like you to consider fostering to help close the large gap between the number of kids in foster care and the number of licensed foster homes. As we get ready to get started tonight, I'd like to share just a few housekeeping items with you. First, please take a moment and review the panel upcoming, and also be sure to visit our website at americaskidsbelong.org to see the other panels that will be offered over the coming weeks. You'll also see scrolling on the screen information about our panelists and moderator. We're not going to spend much time on their bios and backgrounds so that we can just dive right into a robust discussion. I do want to let you know that the discussion is being recorded and we will be sharing it via social media and other channels. And we received and reviewed all the questions that you submitted, and we will do our best to make sure that we address those shared themes throughout the evening. If you have a question come up during the course of the conversation, you can use the Q&A function on your Zoom dashboard at any time, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of our panel discussion. You'll also see a handful of quick polls pop up throughout the conversation, and so that will help us ensure that our content, we're able to meet your content needs in the future as we plan other panels. Lastly, look for an email following this program that will have links and resources, including a recording of tonight's discussion. Our goal is to help you take the next step on your journey to lean into foster care in whatever way makes sense for you. Your response to our survey will be helpful to us in programming with your needs in mind in the future. So with that as background, I'd like to introduce you to Brian Mavis. Brian is co-founder and president of America's Kids Belong and our moderator for tonight. Are you ready to kick off our discussion, Brian?
I am. Thanks, Nanette. And I want to thank everybody for coming, and just doing this kind of thing it takes a little bravery and stepping into this space. And so I first became a foster parent 18 years ago. And back at that time, you had to go to a county building, a building you weren't familiar with, and a room you weren't familiar with, bad fluorescent lighting. And so having an opportunity where you don't have to get in your car and have this, and also with like no obligations in the time to join. But what I'm especially excited about is who we have here and panelists. I wish I had these people to talk to when I was learning about foster care. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of each one, and then help set up the kind of the framework of everything, and then we'll get into starting asking specific questions that will hopefully scratch where you're itching. So who we have with us today, we have Louise Cooper. She works with the Department of Social Services in South Carolina, and so she's going to help us with a specific part of some questions of how you can engage in foster care when you're not necessarily a foster parent, but other ways you can help. We have Scott and Bethany Telle, who are foster and adoptive parents living in Indiana with lots of experience. We have Dairius Kawewehi. So it's a tough last name, but I'm so excited that he's joining us here today. And I think you guys are really going to lean in when he's speaking, because he was a former foster youth. And so to have his perspective on what makes great foster parents can be super important. And then we have Courtney Williams. Courtney has been also a foster and adoptive parent, and is also a foster care recruiter. So real quickly, we need good people, good parents, good adults to step up in this space. There are about a half as many adults that are needed, that are engaged in this space. And foster care is an area where it's largely not spoken about. And when it comes to social wounds, we hear about addiction, we hear about homelessness, we hear about human trafficking and those kinds of things. But you don't hear much about foster care, and there's some myths around it. And I want to emphasize that when you step into foster care, you're going upstream. You're helping kids not have to experience more trauma, and you can help them heal from trauma. And then they can also go to, if they're not connected to a safe family, they're at extreme threats and vulnerabilities to those things I just mentioned: homelessness and addiction and trafficking and suicidality and poverty and incarceration and having their own kids and losing those kids to foster care. So going upstream, stepping into this space is a space where you're making a huge impact societally, individually, and generationally. So this is not just a heart issue, one that really tugs at people's hearts, but I think it's a really smart issue as well. So with that as an introduction, we'll just jump right in and start asking some questions. And hopefully, again, these questions will get where you're wanting to go. And if we don't ask a question that you want to know about, as Nanette said, you can type in some questions and we'll get to those towards the end. So Courtney, we're going to start with you. Let's start with just kind of the real general question of what is the purpose of foster care? Why do we have it?
Yeah, so the purpose of foster care is specifically to care for kids once they're removed from a home, with the goal always being first and foremost reunification. So what that means is when the parent has kids removed, they have like a case plan or a checklist, I like to call it, of things that they need to do to get their kiddos back. And as foster parents, as their guardian ad litem, their entire team, the goal is to help them reunify with their parents and go back to the person or people that they were removed from. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, but that is going to always be the first goal. When that first goal is not reached, then they'll start to look at adoption or guardianship by a family member first, extending many levels of family. And then when that doesn't happen, that's when adoption by a non-family member can happen. But again, always the first goal is going to be reunification. It's best for the kiddos. There's been so many studies done over the years that kiddos want to be with their families, and we should give them that chance of reunifying and working on what they need to work on to be safe and viable for their kids to come back to them.
All right. And you've experienced both. You've, as a personally, as a foster parent, you have fostered through reunification, but also you've adopted, right?
Yes. Yep.
All right. And so that just kind of points out that you can go into this and you never know where the story might end for a child. So I want to open this next question up to everyone, and I'd love everybody to answer, but I'd love to start with Dairius. Dairius, the question is, what makes a good foster parent? And having been a foster youth, what would you wish you would have had?
It's definitely a great question. I would say first and foremost, just having an open mind and just having a space where that child feels safe and feels that, they're able to open up when they want to. So not being forced or prompted to open up, but opening up on their terms. I think that's probably one of the biggest aspects, as far as because I've moved several different times, but that's something that my home that I got adopted in provided a space for, as far as to finally kind of open up everything that we've been kind of harboring inside and kind of start that healing process.
Okay, so somebody who gave you that space and that felt safe enough for you when you were ready to start sharing about your life. Okay, great.
Yeah, because there's a couple homes I've been in, like my first few homes where, I've already, because I entered the system when I was 4, and the first home I enter, I'm getting kind of questions like, I'm like being interrogated, right? It's kind of a traumatic experience because I'm having to relive all that trauma. And during this time period, I was going through several months to years of preparation to go to court against my parents because of what happened to me. And
Right.
so to do that with my therapist and my legal team and my social worker, and then to be interrogated by my my foster parents, that is pretty traumatic. So I don't think that's necessarily the right way to go about it, from my opinion.
Okay. Louise, what would you say would make a good foster parent? You've probably seen a lot of them.
Have, and I've worked with them extensively. I think the foster parents should, what I would like to see is empathy for the child and looking at the situation from the child's point of view. As adults, we sometimes forget that it's very scary. There's so much change. Everything changes in the life of that child coming into foster care. They're not sleeping where they used to sleep. They're not eating the same foods. They're not with the same people. They may not be at the same school. Everything's the same for the adults, but it's not for the child. And if you can have an empathy about that and remember that just being removed from the home that you're used to, even if it wasn't an ideal situation, that's trauma in and of itself, above and beyond even maybe the abuse or neglect that the child had endured.
Yeah, that's really good. I think a lot of adults think, man, doing this is really scary. And then as you point out, it's like, imagine being the kid.
Right.
It's a lot scarier for them. All
Yeah,
right.
I think that's a huge point that she brought up, because I mean, within the same time period, right? Like I still remember the exact first day that I entered foster care. You know, being in that home in the morning, and you know, later by that evening, I'm in a new family. I have you know, like 5 or 6 different siblings where I only had one before. So I mean, just the basic experiences of life for me, very different, right? Like within that 24-hour time span, my life turned upside down. So not even including the trauma and everything else. But like she said, I mean, you know, just the things that we may take for granted day to day, that's kind of constant for us, is that instability for a child kind of going through that situation.
Great. Yeah. So let me keep asking this question and let the other panelists answer it. But I'm going to add another element to the question. So what makes a good foster parent? You wanted to answer that. But now coming off of what they're saying, how could you make them feel safe in the first 24 hours? So Bethany and Scott.
So the first answer I have is just that you really have to go in being willing to learn and watch and not make assumptions, because a lot of times the kids are they're not feeling safe, and so the need to withhold any judgment or withhold any assumptions about that child is really important. What their behavior, what their actions are, probably is not what's on the inside for that child. And there's so many reasons for that I couldn't get into now, but they just might be projecting what they think you want to see, or they might be responding the way they were taught or whatever. But you really, when you talk about making them feel safe, that really is the first priority. And all the parenting you think you know kind of goes out the window until you find something that helps them to feel safe. So things like without, as Dairius said, without drilling them to death, because that doesn't help either, but finding out what they like to eat, or figuring out something that makes them feel comfortable, even if it's something you would never normally do. We've done all kinds of crazy things because that's just what helped that child in that first 24 hours. So for instance, I've had a child sit on my couch and eat a huge bag of Skittles the first night they were at my home. That's not something that would normally go on, but that was comfort for them. And so that was really important. I think being present with them in whatever emotions they have is really important. So even if we're not talking, just making a point of being in the same room or walking through the room on a continuous basis is really important. What do you think?
That's good. That's about all of it. I was going to say, I think if you're talking about the first 24 hours, it really depends a lot, I think, on the age of the child too. So the first 24 hours of a newborn or a really small infant, is scrambling to get all of the core items that you would need, like, diapers and crib and all those specific things. Definitely a different dynamic in the first 24 hours when you have a small infant like that, because we can communicate all the time. But as they get older, those needs just change, and you just got to be ready to shift. And really, the most important thing is, I think, just the willingness to be present with these kids, to look at them in the eyes so they know they're being heard and listened to, and then, yeah, kind of like Dairius said, on their terms. It's not, you don't come in with the answers. You just come in to be present, to walk through all the things that you acknowledge that you don't know what to do either in all of it, but you're going to be there with them to help navigate.
Yeah, good. So Courtney, same question. What makes a good foster parent, but not just what makes a good foster parent, but like what is distinct between being a good foster parent and just being a good parent in general? Like, is there a different tool in the toolbox that you need?
Definitely, but yet not. So all the parenting tools that we've learned through foster care and trauma and adoption, they work for our biological kids as well. So it's not like we're parenting these kids this way and our other kids this way. We try to do it all the same. But kind of like what they were alluding to, that their first day, this is very fresh because we just have a new placement in our house right now of 2 boys. So they've just been here 2 weeks. And so we're kind of walking through those first couple of weeks and what that looks like. But understanding, we have rules, we have structure, we have the things we do in our family, but we can't expect that from these kiddos on day 1, week 2, month 1, right? It's kind of that slow transition, and even teaching our kiddos, not to make fun of them, not to look at them or give them that wrong eye when they do something that we wouldn't typically do in our home. So there's just like a lot of backloading and the parenting in general towards the biological kids, but also of just having that grace and that understanding that they're not going to come in being just like us. They come from a different background, different foods they eat, different time they eat, different amounts they eat, all the stuff. So it's more just that empathy and compassion towards their situation, and realizing that we can't expect so much from them from the get-go, and even over time if they're really struggling with things. I tell people all the time, I feel like the biggest issue that we have, and I've seen in foster homes, is expectations. We set expectations that are just not realistic, and then things go haywire. It's good to have expectations, but they have to be realistic for the kids in your care.
Yeah, those kids, not only, have experienced trauma by what's been done to them, but experience trauma by what not has been done for them. And so they have gaps. And so the expectations is a big deal. And unfortunately, there are some bad foster parents out there. So the goal is not just more, but better ones. And I know, Dairius, you've lived through some bad foster parents. So I would say, as you're getting into this, you're going to learn some new relational skills, specifically for being a foster parent. But as Courtney said, they apply to all relationships, and you'll learn to be better at relationships in general. Okay. Let's get into a little bit of a technicality, the licensing process. Courtney, I know it's different from state to state a little bit, but what's the general process on how to become a licensed foster parent?
Yeah, so as you said, it's different state to state, county by county. So it very much depends on where you live. But generally speaking, for anywhere, your first step would be to figure out what are your options. Some states are ran county by county. Some states are ran like a whole state program. Some states have private agencies. Some states don't. So you really the first step is to just figure out what are your options with where you live. And then from there, pretty much any agency, whether it's private, county, they're going to have informational nights or orientation nights. So I suggest that people sign up for 1, 2, 3, multiple of them. Don't just go to one and say you're done. I would check out different options and then choose which agency or county agency is best for your family. And then once that happens, once you're kind of in your realm of who you're going to be licensed through, then it's pretty much the same for everybody. You have your classes. Typically, they're anywhere from 20 to 30 hours of classes that you'll do. You'll have your home study where they come in. Again, usually 3 times at least they'll come into your home and they'll check things over. They're not only licensing you as parents or caregivers, but they're also licensing your home. So they need to make sure that your home is safe and has the things that it needs for them to be safe in your care. So that home study process, in addition to that, there's fingerprints, medicals, just a checklist that you have to do to be certified. And then your certification lasts 1 year. So it's not a forever certification, it's 1 year. And then you have to recertify every year. And then updates and all those things. If you have new kids that come into your care, if you move to a new house, if you move to a new town, then you have to get updated, of course, because like I said, they're not only licensing you, but they're licensing your home. And so they'll have to come in anytime your home situation changes.
So tell me, Courtney, where do a lot of people end up getting stuck in that process?
Often the classes, because classes sometimes can be really long and the commitment to them can be hard to commit to. Like in Colorado, it's often like an 8-week or 10-week long class. And so committing to the 8 to 10 weeks can be hard. And then just getting your things done. They can't certify you till you get everything done. And some people are really quick and some people like to take their time or slow with paperwork. But yeah, it's typically more on the family than it is the county or the agency.
Okay. Yeah, it is a process. And I mean, part of that's deliberate too. I mean, besides you're trying to learn stuff that you need to learn, they're also trying to weed people out because they want people who are serious and are willing to get better when things get hard. And so
I would also add, this kind of goes back to the first question as well, that they also will weed people out if they'll say that their only goal is adoption. As I kind of said at the very beginning, that the primary goal is reunification. And if we have families that just say they're here to adopt, they will often weed them out from the beginning because that's not the goal of foster care. Could it happen? Yes. If a family says we're open to adoption, that's very different than saying our goal is adoption. So that's something that could weed them out in that process as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bethany, what are the different types of foster parents?
So there are a couple different ways that you can get involved. And for us, one of the things we did when we first started was we did some respite care for some friends that were doing foster care. And that's where you're taking kids for a short-term basis. Sometimes it's just to give other foster parents a break, or if they have like a medical need they need to take care of or something like that, some kind of short-term situation. I really recommend that. It's a great way to get your toes in the water. And if you're thinking a lot about foster care, then providing respite is a really good way to learn some of how it works. So like we did respite for some friends that were going on vacation and couldn't take the child with them. And so the child stayed with us for a week. And that gave us some practice in communication with different people and different things like that. There are also some different kinds of foster care in terms of the care that you give. And I kind of want to say like that can be as broad as there are different kids and different foster parents. Like all the kids are different and all foster parents are different and bring different gifts and skills to the table. And so it can look very different in different homes. And we've seen that in our friend group and people that we've learned from. And some of the slow process, I really suggest that you, in that slow process of getting licensed, you think about what would be a good fit for your family, because there might be some kinds of care that you are either well equipped to provide or not well equipped to provide. And learning about that and talking to other people is a really great way to use that slow build of time where you're waiting to get licensed. Therapeutic care is one term that you'll hear, and that tends to be care where the child has specific medical needs or some other kind of specific need that is identified already. Now I want to say when kids come into your home, it's an emergency, it's a crisis situation. So you can't expect to know everything about that child. In fact, most of the time you will know nothing about that child, but you can learn and you can kind of let whoever you're working with your licensing know like kind of the guidelines that you're looking for, the lane you want to drive in. There's also something called kinship care. This might vary a little bit state to state, but here in Indiana, kinship care just means that the child has had some kind of connection or relationship with you in the past. So we get a lot of teachers providing kinship care, or extended family, or coaches or caregivers of a different kind, like a preschool caregiver or something like that. And that is a really special kind of care, because all the things that you think about that a child handles when they are removed from the only place they've ever known, if they can go to someone that is a familiar face or they have some prior relationship with, it's such a better transition for them, such a safer transition. So Courtney, I might have missed something, so jump in if I forgot.
No, that's good. Yeah, and I think some people might be surprised to realize that kinship, you would think it was an aunt or a grandma or something like that, but it actually goes much broader than that. It's somebody who's had a safe prior relationship with that child, just as you said. Okay, I want to open this up a little bit to y'all, and there are people on here, obviously they're on here because they're wanting to learn, they're interested, they're wanting to take steps forward, but they have not just questions, but maybe some concerns. And you hear a lot of concerns people have that end up becoming the reason they don't become foster parents. So what are some common concerns that end up becoming objections to becoming foster parents, and how would you respond to that? Courtney, I'll let you start. What's the thing that you hear the most that people say, I just don't know if I can do it because of this?
Yeah, so I hear three things by far the most commonly are, I don't have the time. What about my own children? And what if I get too attached? And so first off, I tell people it is going to take a lot of time. There's no joke about it. It takes a lot of time. Again, we have a new placement right now. Last week we had 12 appointments. This week we have 12 appointments in this 1 week alone. It is a therapeutic placement, so there are extra level of
more than usual. Yeah.
But it does take a lot of time. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. And that's where you need to find your people. You need to find your people that are going to support you. You need to just look at your schedule realistically to say, is this going to work? Can this work for us? And kind of make that judgment. But it is doable. Like I said, if you find people to support you, there are a lot of organizations, church groups, other things, your neighbors, people that want to be there to help you and help you thrive. So yes, it is a barrier, but it's not necessarily one that can't be overcome. And then the children, that's probably the one I hear the most is, what about my children? And I'll tell you, it's not, we've been licensed for 15 years, but we've only been active for 12 years because we had kids and then we got scared. But I'll say, looking back, I wish we had just started then, because it has been the sweetest thing for our family. And I can only speak to our experience, but it has grown our children in numerous ways for the better, and they still choose to do it. It's a family decision, and all of them choose for us to keep doing it. So yes, have there been some hard things? This week alone, my 5-year-old said his first F word because he was introduced to it by our 2 new kiddos, right? There are going to be hard things, but we walk through that with our kids, and our kids come from a safe and healthy environment. And so they're able to walk through, and, there are going to be hard things, but they have the capacity, because they've been in that safe environment, to walk through those things with us and not be a traumatic thing necessarily. And then the last one, the attachment. And I just look at people and say, that's your role. Your role is to get attached, and know, again, that it likely is temporary, but your role is to get attached. And hopefully you're willing to do that, because that's what these kiddos need. They don't just need love. They need the time. They need the patience. They need the attachment. They need all of that. And it can't be that fakeness of, again, here's my kids. Those are they're different kids. Like, we're in this family together. We're doing this together. We're a family unit, and you're part of it for as long as you need to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got time, you're impacting your own kids, and just fear of getting attached. What else? What other concerns do some of you guys hear?
Brian, as the kind of second one to come to the table of foster care, I give her a lot of the credit for getting us involved. Sometimes when the need for foster care, that question is asked, we need more foster parents. It's like that moment in the classroom where you don't want to give the eye contact to the teacher because
Right.
you're afraid you're going to get called on.
Mhm.
And I think for me, my experience personally has been, I felt like saying yes to anything was like saying yes to tomorrow. This, our house is going to double in size, and that's not the case. There's a lot of fear, in that you're just going to completely lose control. And I would say that the opposite is true. That if you're even considering foster care, that going to your local, DCS office or whatever that looks like in your state, and asking what those certifications look like. I thought I had learned enough to kind of engage in this. And then I went to the training and realized I knew nothing. And we know friends of ours who have gone through the whole process of certification and got to the end of the process and said, you know what, now that we understand the full scope, we actually think it's not yet the season for us to do this. And then on the other extreme, there's like us, the more training we got, the kind of more we realized like, just definitely in this season, that's right for us. And you talked about the family thing too. For us, definitely has stretched us, but it also has stretched our family in really good ways. There are absolute challenges and that sort of thing, but that is not something that our children to this point have looked to us and said, please don't do this again. It's the opposite. It's when are we going to be able to help some more kids, because it's very close to their hearts. So it's fun to watch their compassion grow through the experience, honestly.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'll speak into this too. I mean, when it comes to time, yep, it is can be time consuming. So have your tribe, people who will help wrap around how it impacts your kids. My girls were in 3rd and 5th grade when we started fostering. They're now adults. My oldest daughter is the 5th grader, has been a foster and adoptive mom now for several years. So that's how it impacted her growing up through high school. They felt like it was the thing that really shaped them the most in their deepening their character. And so it's not just hard, it's also good. And so I understand the fears and concerns, but a line that we use is that foster care can be messy, but it doesn't have to be lonely. And so you have people to help you. Scott, you have something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's not just a yes or no in foster care. There's these other roles that Bethany talked about, but even within being foster parents, due to the nature of our family at any given time, the ages of our biological kids and adoptive kids, we can set boundaries within what we feel like we're capable of. And so, DCS is going to always make you aware of the need, but you still are able to participate in a way that kind of fits within what you feel confident in and capable of, and don't ever have to say yes to something that's not going to fit.
Yeah. So we're Louise, we're going to go to that a little bit more. What other things we can do? So when people say I can never do that, it's like you can say fine, but what can you do? Before we get to Louise, I want to go back to Dairius. Dairius, as a former foster youth, you had a difficult time in foster care. What would have met your needs in a more helpful and healing way? And so take a few minutes, just maybe share a little bit why it was hard and what could have changed things for you.
Well, man, it's a good question. So I guess a point that Courtney brought up earlier was that the goal of foster care is not always adoption, right? Sometimes, in many cases, if the situation's right, is reunification. But for my particular case, that was not possible, just based on the
Mhm.
circumstances that led me into care in the first place. But I would say, because I entered the system like 25 years ago, I mean, I think there's definitely been improvement since then. But when I was in the system, I don't know if there's as robust vetting. Granted, this could vary from state to state. And so I did end up in a lot of homes where the motivation was more so the monetary gain that parents get from being foster parents, right? And especially if you're a foster parent of those that are special needs, which is, you know, what I was. And so what made it difficult is when I'm in these homes and I'm living with other children that are also foster children, and some of them are the biological children of the families I'm with, is being threatened with being removed from the home, right? That kind of lingered over my head many
Mm.
times. And so especially my first home, that kind of forced me to kind of close myself off and not really open up. So I never really dove into a lot of the trauma that I had, and a lot of the emotions I had inside, to open up to my therapist, because I was afraid if I were to say something that it would somehow make its way back to my family, and then I would be removed from the home, right? And so, you know, kids are kids, right? Like, you kind of learn what right and wrong is over time with experience, right? And so a lot of the times when I would mess up, right, I would do something wrong, I was threatened, you know, even at 4 years old, 5 years old, threatened with being removed from the home. And so that just closed me off. And so as I went from that home to other future homes, that just even further kept myself kind of closed off and kept the emotions bottled up inside.
Mhm.
So I never really had that chance to kind of fully open up and kind of be myself until I finally had that stability. So I think, you know, first off, to make the experience easier kind of growing up in my situations, is having, I think, you know, from a regulation standpoint, is vetting that we have the right people with the right motivations, right? Doing it for the right reasons, right? They're passionate about it. You're not just providing a physical home structure, right? But you're providing, like, you know, that full and intensive, like, wholehearted care, even when times are tough, right? And so I think that alone, like, having that support system, as a family unit that, you know, the other panelists kind of described, I think if I were in those situations, I mean, that's ideal, right? It's all hands on deck, and just being part of that family unit from day one, I think is huge. And that's something I wish that I could have experienced more of, you know, in all the other homes that I lived in. But I was glad that I finally did get to that situation. Whereas a lot of the other foster siblings I met along the way, like, we reconnected after I went to high school and college. You know, some of them never found that, and they aged out of the system with no support unit, and kind of had to grow up on their own. So just being able to have that support, not only from just the family, but, you know, having a good external support system. So having a good therapist that kind of resonates with both the family and the child, I think would be great. And then having something that the child can kind of unwind and be themselves. Like, for me, I did a lot of sports growing up, and so that was very helpful to kind of provide me an outlet to bond and socialize with other people. And so, yeah, really just
Yeah.
the support system, I think, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and not being treated differently. I mean, yeah. If your kids are in martial arts, and then give your foster children that opportunity. Or, I mean, you've got pictures of your kids around the house. Have a picture of those kids as well, and make them feel like they're a part of that family. Okay, so
I got one thing to touch on that real quick. So there is an example. So he's my youngest brother. You know, we were adopted together, but one of the homes he lived in was very, very segregated, like how you described. Like, there's the the biological kids, and then there's the foster kids, and he was the only one in that home. And so the money that they got from him, they used to spend on their kids, like, oh, we're gonna get so and so a bike for Christmas or something. And so that kind of really ostracized him, and so he felt like he acted up in school because of what was happening in the home front. And the teachers and whatnot couldn't fully comprehend the situation that's going on because of everything that's going on at home. So really just kind of, like you said, unifying the family unit, I think is huge.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. Well, it is, there are hard moments. And so, Scott and Bethany, like what has been some of the challenging parts of fostering?
I think that what I would always tell people is there's so many layers to any one thing that's going on, that just recognizing that you may not ever have all the pieces to the puzzle. A lot of kids that have been in our homes for various reasons, sometimes their age, sometimes their situation, can't tell us what their history was, or what they struggled with, or what they would like expressing their feelings is sometimes very hard. So I think trying to provide the best care, but also acknowledge that we can't always either fix everything or even understand everything, has probably been the hardest thing, because of the layers. And also the team approach to parenting is just a reality to foster care. Like, a lot of times you're on your own, but then a lot of times there's extra people in your house and extra people giving input on what they think a child might need. And so being able to stand steady and just provide a safe place for the kids, I think is kind of just like, I just often remind myself what my lane is and where I can help. And then sometimes you just have to know when to let go and not be able to fix every single thing.
Yeah, that's good. As far as that's hard. I mean, because you do want to fix things. And I would just say, again, don't come into this space thinking you're the hero. But do come in with the attitude of being like a healer. And you might not be able to fix all their wounds, but you can help heal, be a part of that journey, part of the process, and part of one of the people in their lives that is a safe person that helps them heal. Okay, so with people listening right now and learning, there might get to a point, Scott, you mentioned this, where as they learn more, they think, well, maybe my space isn't to be a foster parent, but I don't want to do nothing. I want to do something. So, Louise, what are other things that people can do besides being a foster parent that can help kids in foster care?
There's so many ways, and really the truth of the matter is every child should have an array of people watching over them, and most people should be thinking in terms of the well-being of every child they encounter. One important role in the child welfare and foster system is to be a child advocate. Guardians ad litem, or court-appointed special advocates, they're known as both in different states. They're appointed by the family court to speak on behalf of that child for the child's best interest. That's their only role. They don't have to be concerned about their sole focus is the best interest of that child. They're not there to speak on behalf of the parents. We all know that if parents and families can be helped, that's best for children. So of course they become concerned about that. But in the role as a guardian ad litem, what you're really focusing on is what is it that you want the court to be recommending that happens for this child. The thing I think that's important, these are volunteers, and they come into the home where the child is. They follow the child, and they should be a constant presence for that child throughout the duration of the time that they're in foster care, so that it's another adult that they can feel like is a mooring for them in a difficult and traumatic time. And if that that person is seeing that child. I know in my state, it's supposed to be a requirement monthly at a minimum that that child is seen face to face, so that you can monitor what is going on with them and making recommendations for therapy if needed, recommendations for outside school activities, tutoring, all sorts of things that a child might need, along with the foster parent. And I think that's part of the support system that the foster parents here have spoken about. If you have a good guardian ad litem, a good court-appointed special advocate, that person can really take the information foster parents have about the day-to-day for children and really put that into action in a way that perhaps the system otherwise might not. It's a very important role for kiddos. And I think everyone who says the same thing that you hear in foster parenting sometimes, I just don't think I could let that child go at the end of the case. Well, I think you can, because I think you have to think about the child's interest before your own. And so the child needs you to come and advocate. And I used to always tell my volunteers when I was training and supporting volunteers and doing the work myself, is I can walk away, but the children can't. So for children, we need to hold fast. And that's true we have teachers, we have therapists, we have coaches, as everyone's mentioned, that are very important in the life of children. So education about the needs of kids and what some kids are going through that may not be the norm that people know about, all of that will help us all to be more sensitive, even if you are not in a formal role for that child.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thankful for people who weren't foster parents who really stepped up and helped out the kids that we were fostering, and then they were helping us out too. So you have other families who say, I can't foster, but I can surround you, I can support you. And so there are people we've had who've helped in our lives, and my own daughters now, they help with laundry and stuff like that. So there's definitely, again, the option isn't foster care or nothing. It's foster care or something else that can make a big difference. Okay, so before we go to specific questions that our audience has asked, I have to do one more question. I do want to end it on a high note. It's not just hard; it's good. What has been the most rewarding part of being engaging in the foster care world?
I'll start if that's okay.
Yes.
I have not been a foster parent, but I've been a child advocate for many years. And what's rewarding to me is seeing that children succeed, seeing that they come to wholeness even after trauma. And it's a wonderful thing when you get a chance to see those kids really do well and be whole.
Dairius is a testament to that. I mean, so Dairius, why don't you share a little bit? I mean, being engaged in foster care was not your choice, but you were there, and you have gone from being a kid who was harmed deeply to being an adult who has healed greatly. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my biggest healing, I guess, journey was in high school. So this was, years after I was already kind of adopted out of the system. But that was kind of where I came to terms of kind of accepting everything that happened in the past and having forgiveness for both myself and everything I went through. And then internally kind of forgiving my parents for all that happened and allowing myself to move on and move towards a future that I could envision. And so since then, I've had the opportunity to graduate university. I studied mechanical engineering, and then I commissioned into the Navy as a Navy nuclear officer. I serve on submarines. I've been in for nearly 8 years now. So having kind of gone through everything I've went through as a kid, teenager to, I didn't even think that university was possible, right? I mean, you look at statistics, about 3% of foster youth go to college, right? And then of that percentage is very small that actually graduate. So, I'm very humbled at the opportunity that I have to serve my country and to receive an education. And now I'm actually on my transition out of the military, and I'm a real estate investor and an entrepreneur. So I'm grateful for all the support I've had throughout my entire journey to get to this point in my life.
So yeah, I mean, there's an example of what Louise was talking about right there of how they're not destined to a life of perpetual brokenness. And so one of the things I like to say is a good family is better than a great program. And I'm thankful for the programs that help the homeless and addicted and all those other areas. But man, if a kid can have a family that they can count on, that can bring a lot of healing to their lives. Okay, anybody else want to say what's been especially rewarding in stepping up and engaging in this space?
We kind of touched on it earlier about sibling relationships, but I assumed wrongly that when we brought kids into our home, it would take a while for those sibling-like relationships to form. And I haven't fostered all kids, so I don't know that that's all the case, but our experience is that it almost makes me giggle how quickly they start acting like siblings in all the good and bad ways. Like they will pick on each other immediately. They will also defend each other to the death immediately. And I have loved watching that unfold. And there are a lot of times that, play and having fun is some of the best healing for kids. And there are a lot of times that I've seen that happen in our family that probably Scott and I wouldn't be able to provide, but the other kids in our family can provide just some lighthearted play and silliness that has given a rest from carrying a lot of burdens for some of the kids. So
that's so good. I can say the same. My girls, they were fantastic at helping just be foster sisters and treating the kids just like if they were born to us. And whether we were babies, and then we had a teenage boy that was older than them, and they would tease him and he would tease them back. It was just like so normal. It was weird. Just like seeing that all happen, and then how that brought my girls to be even more compassionate, I think, than they would have been just kind of being, the tendency as teens to be self-absorbed. So it was very rewarding to see that as well. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Nanette, who's going to help us with some questions that some people have asked specifically that we haven't gotten to.
All right, thanks, Brian. We are about to get started with Q&A, so you can still submit questions at any time using that Q&A button at the bottom. We got a lot of great questions, and Courtney did answer some, but I think there's some worth touching on for the group as well. If you want to take the next step to become a foster parent, make sure you register for our next webinar, which will be on Thursday, August 31st, same time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And it is really going to be focused on the process from getting licensed to accepting your first placement. So some of what you heard today touched on this. This will be a deeper dive into that. I also want to just mention that it takes substantial time and resources to curate content like what you're enjoying here this evening. So if you support our mission and you would like to help us host more events like this, we'd love to invite you to consider making a tax-deductible donation to America's Kids Belong. You can do that right from our homepage, americaskidsbelong.org, and there's a donate button prominently on the homepage. So thanks for considering that. And let's start our Q&A. So there's been a couple different versions of this question that came up tonight. If you are a certified foster parent already and you want to explore adoption, what does that process look like? And if somebody becomes a foster parent, what is the process? What is the transition, or what are some considerations moving from foster care to adoption?
Courtney, you've lived that. You'd like to take that on?
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, if a kiddo is already in your care, like I said, they're going to always look for family members first. But if they're in your home and it goes to an adoption by a non-family member, then that, in a sense, that foster home, they're going to ask them first because they already have that relationship, right? So somebody, if Bethany wants to adopt a kiddo that's in my home right now, it just doesn't work that way. They're always going to ask that family first because they want to keep them with people they know first and
You've
foremost.
essentially become kin along the way.
Yeah. Yep,
Mhm.
exactly. But if you're talking about state to state or from a different county within your state, unfortunately, a lot of times the county agencies don't have the bandwidth or the finances to do home studies just for adoption. And that's why I said, if people want to just adopt, a lot of times counties won't do that. So then they'll go through a private agency, and a private agency would come into your home and do your home study and get you licensed. So you have an open home study that you can then send on to a different state, a different county, a different agency that has kiddos that are waiting to be adopted. And that's when, and again, and this is my opinion, but kids should first be in their families. They should next be in a family or with somebody they know, and they should stay in their state if there is a home that is close to them, that is viable and an option for them. So it is hard sometimes to go from state to state because that is proven that that's best for them to stay where they know. It does happen oftentimes in hard to place kiddos or kiddos who are aging out of the system that need that placement and don't have it yet. You likely see it more often in those cases than not.
All right. And then we got a couple of questions about qualifications to be foster parents. So if somebody has anxiety or they have pets, what are some of the basic requirements, or what are things like that that might surprise folks that are not obstacles to becoming a foster parent?
Courtney, since you are a recruiter, this is kind of stuff, you're doing a lot of heavy lifting here. I'll let you do that one again.
Yeah, there are things that will not allow you to get.
What will disqualify someone?
Yeah, a very common one that comes up in our state is marijuana use. I think because it is legal here, people think that they should be able to foster if they use marijuana. The way I understand it is because it's not open federally. There, you can't be a marijuana user and have kiddos in your care. So that's a big one in our state. But then there's other things, like if you have, people ask me all the time, I had a DUI when I was 25 years old, I'm now 45. Is that going to prohibit it from happening? And that's not the case. I mean, they're going to look at your record. They're going to see, has it been years? Have you been clean for years? Do you still have something you're addicted to? If something is still ongoing or in the recent past, they're likely going to say this isn't the right time for you. But if it's something, further on down the road, it's been a long time, or you can show your growth, then they will likely license you. So it kind of depends on the time and the situation.
Yeah, so they're not looking for a squeaky clean past. I mean, if you've hurt a child, then you're not going to get, but like Courtney said, if you were in college and, you were drinking, you were only 19, those kinds of things, honestly, some of them, some people are like, we want people who've got a little bit of history so they, real life and know what hard times are like. And so you don't have to be perfect, to be a foster parent. So the one thing though is back to the home study. I think there might be the misconception that when you're talking about a home study, they're only thinking about your physical house, and they are looking at that. You got a bedroom and beds, and it's safe, but they're also asking about your home life. And so they do ask about, things that you're like, gosh, that seems private.
And they'll interview your kids and they'll ask your kids, privately, like, how do mom and dad discipline you when you're in trouble, and those things. I mean, they are looking to see that you are, again, not squeaky clean. We all have our errors, but that you're going to be that safe home for them.
Yeah, they're looking to make sure that you're safe. And again, I'm surprised, by some, again, I think it's getting better, but we do need better families who are safe. And I guess what I'm against is people who are doing it for the money. And so if that's your motivation, do something else, get a job.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Eric Reed talked about having been on a wait for his county to catch up. He's previously fostered and adopted and wanted to dive back in. And I think that also opens the door to a little broader discussion about how to navigate the child welfare process and the waiting, and what kind of patient perseverance might be required.
Louise, you want to try that one?
Well, I think that patient perseverance is a very good phrase to begin with, because it is child welfare organizations are government agencies. And so there's many opportunities for things to sometimes move a little slower than you like. I think the vetting process is important, as Dairius mentioned. It needs to be very intense. And so that can create what feels like to a person who's eager to get on with helping children to be problematic. Every state that I have ever talked with in any way is always trying to move a little quicker to move through that paperwork process. And so I think that if you develop a good relationship with the licensing unit and you let them know that you are sincere and that you really want to do it, that you will have a personal ability to say to them, I've been waiting this long, go up the chain. If something doesn't happen in a reasonable amount of time, don't be afraid. People sometimes think, well, if I complain, I'm going to be blackballed. I won't get to the next step. But you want to, in a very mature way, go to the next level and say, I've been waiting for this long for this piece of paperwork. How can we expedite? So that's what I would say is a little self-advocacy to move things along.
I love that you said that word, self-advocacy. That's my advice for people, like when they're having health issues, like be your best advocate, advocate for yourself when in the medical industry. It's the same thing true here. Advocate for yourself. And the reason is you're building up muscles, because the ultimate goal is you're going to be advocating for the youth in your life. And so do it in a way that is emotionally mature, healthy, respectful. But again, learn to be an advocate, because ultimately you're advocating for these kids.
Right.
We got a couple good additional questions.
I would add one more thing to that.
I'm sorry.
Nanette.
Go ahead, Bethany.
I would just add one thing to that, that like they're saying, do everything, like kindness goes so far. The situations that caseworkers are dealing with are so hard, and they mostly have people angry with them a lot of the time. So don't assume the worst about the people you're dealing with, assume their best, and also remember that they have a lot of urgency on their plate. And so a really kind email reminder can go a long way.
That's great. Yeah. This whole thing is about being kin, and kin is the same root word of the word kind. So embrace both.
All right. We got a couple more last minute questions that I think are worth sharing with the group. One is it more difficult to become a foster parent if you do not have any bio children?
Difficult as in being licensed? No, absolutely not. Difficult as in kids having connections? Maybe, but I think you'd find those. It's just like starting a family from the ground up, right? All kiddos come into the world oftentimes with being the only kiddo. So depends what you mean by that question. But as far as the county goes, it's not going to be more difficult by any means.
No, and sometimes they're looking for families without other kids in the household. So some kids just need that individual attention. So, right. We need you.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. There's so much need that they would be so happy to have you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Victor said, we are interested in fostering, and he wanted to understand the rules for things like traveling. If you travel out of the country for the holidays, are foster children allowed to leave the country generally?
With approval, yes. You have to go through a chain of commands and get the paperwork. We took some kids in care to Mexico a couple years ago. So it's definitely doable. You just have to kind of follow a process to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And last question is, how many bedrooms do you need to be a foster parent?
How many what?
Bedrooms are needed to
Bedrooms?
be a foster parent. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes 0. Sometimes they'll put them in the living room. I mean, they want to see that they have a space, right? They want to have their personal space, not meaning their personal bedroom. They can share rooms with kiddos of the same gender. So they can share a room. They just need to, need to make sure you have enough space for them and closet space, a place for their belongings. We actually have a bedroom where they came out and measured our bedroom to see if it was big enough for 3 kids. So in our state, it's 40 square feet per child in a bedroom. So there are some rules and guidelines for that, but they just want to see that you have a physical space, and they are going to have their space, a place to go to if they need some privacy, and then a space to keep their belongings.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining and for your thoughtful questions. It was a great discussion. I hope you gained the insight that you came here. Just want to remind you to check your inbox for an email with a link to the survey, and we'll look forward to seeing you at an upcoming event. And on behalf of America's Kids Belong, we just want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to join tonight and for offering really robust, wonderful information. Super grateful for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you so much.